Ne yapalım? Kraliçenin televizyonu, BBC, resmi yayın organı İngiltere, yıllarca burada görev yapan, hem muhabirlikten başlayıp son nokta...
Kolay kolay orada görev yapamazsın.
Evet.
Sörler yönetti yıllarca BBC'yi.
Son geldiği nokta BBC yorumcusu Tony Gosling. YazBoz'a özel açıklamalar yaptı. Londra'da sevgili Alparslan görüştü. Hep birlikte izliyoruz.
First of all, it's not just the Israelis, the Americans and the British that have established ISIS. It's really a NATO operation, I think. And this is where the Turkish military also comes in, because of course Turkey is also part of NATO. I think probably right from the very first days when Turkey joined NATO, there was always going to be this problem storing up for the future, where on the one hand Turkey is largely Islamic country and also part of this NATO power bloc. There was always going to be problems for Turkey deciding which side is it on. As for the origins of it, I think you'll find many of the fighters in ISIS are also from Libya and from Syria. So these are Islamist forces. The Islamic Fighting Group, for example, was supported by the British, by MI6 many years ago, in an attempt to kill Colonel Gaddafi, for example. And also in Syria, much support was given by Britain and other NATO countries to the Syrian rebels, we call them. Well, we like to call them the rebels, but we were helping to arm them via places like Qatar and Saudi Arabia. So ISIS has not appeared out of nowhere. It's just a new name for an old organisation which was created to fight Colonel Gaddafi and to fight President Assad of Syria. It's just been rebranded. Literally, look at some of the commanders. Many of them have been tortured in American prisons. So these people are actually, I think, part of an operation which is much wider than just Israel, US and the UK. The ultimate purpose of ISIS is an interesting one. I think it's a honeypot. This is a kind of terminology which the intelligence people will use, because they know there's lots of disaffected people out there, mostly Islamic people who can see the way that the Islamic world is under attack right now, just as the Jewish people were under Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. There was a pogrom against the Jews. There's now many people who believe that there's a pogrom against the Islamic world, and in order to fight against that, they believe there needs to be an armed struggle. So ISIS is there to bring those people in. But the thing is, I believe it's still controlled by the NATO powers, and that's the whole point, is they want to control both sides of the chessboard in the war in the Middle East. As regards the monarchy, it's quite clear the British monarchy are pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist. Their influence is much greater than people realise in Britain. They have, for example, a lot of say over some key appointments in the military world, for example. The Duke of Edinburgh is a field marshal in the British Army, etc. So they have a lot more power than people realise. They also have freedom of information requests. So when journalists like me try and find out what the royals are up to, they just say, sorry, we can tell you nothing. So there's a lot of secrecy around the royal family. Also, the political side of Zionism is very strong in Britain. You've got Labour Friends of Israel, Conservative Friends of Israel, very powerful lobbying groups, Zionist lobbying groups with lots of money that sponsor candidates, much as they do in the United States. So the Israel lobby, I call it, really not Jewish, because many Jews are abhorred by the State of Israel, the way that the State of Israel has treated the Palestinians, for example, broken international law, that kind of thing. There's a lot of Jews that don't like it, but it's a very powerful force in Britain still, in politics, in royalty, and in Freemasonry, the religious cult. Well, for hundreds of years, the Rothschild family has been very important in the City of London. The City of London is a strange institution. Actually, the Queen has to ask permission if she wants to enter the City of London. The Rothschild family is extremely influential in Britain for hundreds of years now. The place where they reside is the City of London, the Rothschild Bank and investment firms. The City of London is run in almost like an independent state, a state within a state. Even the Queen has to call on the phone and ask permission if she wants to enter the City of London, because it's considered to be a challenge to their power if she comes in. Every way you walk into the City of London, you will find a red dragon staring at you in the street. Everywhere around the circle, around the outside of the City of London, these dragons are there. This is an old idea, many people maybe don't even notice it. But the dragon, of course, in biblical terms, symbolises the devil. So what is there about the City of London that might be to do with the dragon? Who knows? So it's a mysterious institution, the city, and the Rothschilds sit really in the centre. They're very powerful in regards to policy making. The Central Policy Review staff in Britain was set up in the 1970s, and who was the chair of it? Victor Rothschild. Maybe I'll say another couple of things about the Bilderberg conferences, because people may not know them. This is a secret meeting that takes place through the year, and one big meeting every year. It was set up in 1954 after the Second World War, really from American big business that wanted to make sure that Europe, nobody in Europe, turned communist. They were very worried. The European countries, particularly Italy and Yugoslavia, were going to become communist countries. Yugoslavia obviously did, although it wasn't part of the Soviet Union, and this was a big worry for the Americans, and also for many rich and powerful people in Europe. They made all sorts of conspiracies about communism. This is a terrible thing. But the fact was, they were really worried about losing their industrial empires, because communists, if they saw somebody had too big a monopoly, too much power, they would take that off them and nationalise it. And that meant that the big families would lose their wealth. So really it was a selfish thing to do, and the Bilderberg conferences were set up to make sure that there was no drift in Europe towards the left, and it stayed more in favour of the United States, not of the Soviet Union. And it was very successful, even though it was quite secretive. The Bilderberg conferences I've been studying really since 1996, when I first discovered them, and I can tell you it's a pretty simple operation. Really, they are the lobby for the NATO countries. They certainly don't control the world, although they would very much like to, and they work very closely with the banking system and the military, most importantly. Also, of course, oil companies. But they're there to coordinate the grabbing of more and more resources to themselves. They're an extremely powerful organisation. The people that meet at their annual conference, 120 or so, control most of the money in the Western world. There's very little that they don't control. They have in their media too. So, for example, the BBC sent somebody, but they don't actually report on the conference. So they're involved in the discussions, but they don't like to report on the conference. At a national level, you'll find similar organisations to the Bilderberg, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, for example.
BBC yorumcusu Tony Gosling'le kalan röportajı yayınlıyoruz. Dikkatle izleyin, ibretle izleyin, not alın, yazın, çocuklarınıza anlatın.
Are a very powerful organisation behind the scenes. For example, in law enforcement, in the police, it's well known that many police in Britain join the Freemasons. What's not so well known is the oaths that they swear are blood-curdling oaths. Those oaths are to protect the organisation, the club, the cult, many people say is a cult, a religious cult, against interests of others. So that is, you will never reveal the secrets of the Freemasons, you will never reveal the secret code, the secret handshake. Yes, this is one of the best well-known things about the Masons, is their secret handshake. But essentially what it does is it creates a cult. Because of those, the reason I say cult is because the oaths that they're swearing are so strong. What they're saying essentially is, if I tell a secret that you don't want me to tell outside the Freemasons, or I tell the secrets of Freemasonry itself, you can kill me. And the rituals explain that. With a dagger to the heart, a noose around the neck. This is all explained in very graphic terms to anyone who enters Freemasonry. If a father initiates his son into Freemasonry, the father may well be the one who is actually holding a dagger to the bare chest of his son. A very strange cult. But many people think it's just normal, and they try to put a gloss on it. Actually, it's a possibility for criminality. Because of the secrecy involved, it enables groups of people to actually get involved in crime. Now, if you think about the involvement of the police as well in a Masonic lodge, then you can see that there may be collusion within the police. And there's many problems. For example, in London, with the expenses scandal, we have had evidence that Freemasonry has been used within the police to protect criminals, in the phone hacking scandal, and also possibly with paedophilia too, in the British police and in the British high society. So this is something I think may be a scandal to come out in the future, but certainly I think with good probity, no organisation should allow anybody to be in any powerful position, certainly in any public position, without declaring whether or not they're a Freemason, because then it's all above board. Everyone knows who your associates are. Well, MI6 has been involved in supporting Islamist terrorism really since Operation Cyclone and the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. MI6, through Operation Cyclone, set up a whole jihadi terror network. And really that jihadi terror network has now reached massive proportions in the world. Many of the individual Muslims who get involved in the jihadi networks, Islamist networks, don't realise how influential MI6 have been in that. They see it as a big success. I see it as a terrible waste of public money and a waste of human life, because the MI6 have decided that in order to create conflict, this is one of the best mechanisms, is if you can control the people who would be your natural opposition. And that is the game MI6 have been playing ever since Operation Cyclone. It's also worth noting that Roland Dumas, the French foreign minister, in 2013 went on French television and he said that during the previous administration, that's the Sarkozy administration in France, the British MI6 had come to see him and said, we want to start an uprising in Syria. Would you like to join us? So there's very strong evidence that the British were behind the uprising in Syria originally. You may think, by looking at your television, you may see people come out onto the streets. They look like they're spontaneously coming onto the streets. But many of these organisations are funded through what they call white propaganda. That is to say, money that's coming from the secret services that's going to fund NGOs that ostensibly just want democracy. They want more power to the people, this kind of thing. But many of them are actually funded by the CIA, MI6 and similar organisations. So the next time you see an uprising of people coming out onto the street, you must never assume that it's spontaneous. You must always look at the organisations involved. And this is where Bilderberg comes in too, because at the Bilderberg conference 2 or 3 years ago, there was something called the Syrian National Council. Actually came to Bilderberg, but this was a fake organisation. It had been set up rather like the anti-Castro Cuban organisations back in the 1960s in the United States as a fake government in exile. So this is what they do, is they set up their own organisations, MI6 do, and the CIA do, that look to represent the real values of the people of Syria or one of these other organisations. Actually, it's all controlled with money from the black budgets, that is, the secret intelligence budgets. So yes, next time you see a rally on the streets, always ask yourself, now is this a real one or is this a CIA rally? That's the ultimate end game, I think, is with the Israelis, because they actually want to create conflict around Israel in order to start to control more and more in the Middle East. So that's why I say Temple Mount is a key place. If you've got conflict, you've got the shock doctrine. Naomi Klein's brilliant book and film, The Shock Doctrine, which means that if you have conflict, you can control the outcome. You can't change things. It's very difficult to change things in times of peace. But if you can create a war, you can control the outcome. I mean, we've seen this, for example, with the big American companies like Kellogg Brown Root coming in and rebuilding countries. They're doing this thing, divide and rule. We've been doing it for centuries. So you create chaos and you come in and say, we can bring order. You bring order and everybody's happy, but it's your order that you're bringing. So it's a very sneaky game. Ultimately, with the Middle East, I think it's pretty clear the expansion of Israel is on the cards. Ever since the 1967 war, we've seen Israelis breaking all the promises that they made with now the big occupied territories, and there is no rule of law ever since 1967 in the world until the international community tells the Israeli government that you must go back to your original borders, that you can't just take land and keep it against international law. What we have is a trickle-down effect of lawlessness throughout the world, and so I think we need to nail that one. But the British, I think, the governments of Britain and the United States actually want to see Israel expanding in the Middle East, because really, effectively, it has very little to do with Old Testament Judaism. It's much more to do with modern day big business and Freemasonry. Freemasonry is very big in Israel, and so it's in a way an outpost of capitalism in the Middle Eastern world, in what is essentially a much more moral world. The Islamic morals are very strong, very powerful. And this is a way of smashing them down. I think that's their ultimate agenda, because they want to be able to rule by money and corporations. What happens then is it comes up against moral considerations. Those moral considerations in the West have been overcome. In other words, corporations can do virtually what they want. Money is God. But money is not yet God in the Middle East, and that's what the British MI6, the CIA, the British government and the American government want. They want their money to be God in the world. They operate in every country on earth, and I would say actually that Turkey is one of the key countries that they operate in, because the evidence is that it's mostly the Islamic world that MI6 is interested in, and of course they're also interested in the military and NATO. So I would imagine MI6 has quite a strong presence in Turkey, and if I were a Turkish politician or in the Turkish military, I would be keeping a very close eye on who the British military attaches were, for example, at the embassy, and what a close eye on what they were up to, because there is a dichotomy between Turkey's membership of NATO and Turkey as an Islamic country, because most of what NATO does nowadays is trying to demolish the Islamic faith, not just to take Islamic oil, but also to demolish the morals of the Islamic people around the world. So be very careful about MI6's operations in Turkey is what I would advise. No, I'm afraid I don't know any names of any of these sorts of people at all. But if I were you, I would be looking at Freemasonry as a vector for a lot of this, because it is a cult and it's a very good way to hide things secretly. So anybody who's travelling to or from Turkey, particularly who speaks Turkish, who is also a Freemason, keep an eye on them. Well, I think no broadcasting corporation in the Western world now really wants to concentrate too much upon problems at home. What we've got here in Britain are massive scandals. I mean, for example, we now have hard evidence of murder and paedophile rings involving Buckingham Palace, the royal family and the Conservative Party. The last thing that the British government wants to have on its agenda around the cabinet table is this. Actually, problems abroad, wars, this kind of thing, what it does is it really just diverts the attention of the population away from the problems at home. The government's job is to look after the problems at home. The Home Office, we call it here. Theresa May's our Home Secretary, but she's not dealing with the big problems that there are with criminality and child abuse going on or having gone on historically within the Conservative Party and in Whitehall, that is within the civil service. Criminals being protected in all sorts of different ways. So it's a very convenient thing to talk about Turkey or anywhere else where you're not actually looking at the real problems on your own doorstep. They're too afraid of the politicians. I've heard people talking about the BBC as really made up of cowards and control freaks. So there's very little real good creativity coming out of the BBC now. George Soros is a very interesting character. He is a regular attender at the Bilderberg conferences, which I've studied, which is where much of the wealth of the Western world is controlled. And this is a secret meeting, so he's part of this, if you want, cult, a small group of individuals that have immense wealth and power. The danger is, nowadays, that some of those people at those conferences, like Soros, stand to gain financially as other people suffer. I'll explain what I mean. For example, with the gambling, the casino economy, with derivatives and futures markets, you can bet on, say, the price of grain, the price of flour, basic foodstuffs going up or down. And then, potentially, you could influence that price. So, if there's great suffering in the world and people don't have enough to eat, you could be making money from that. That's the crazy situation we've created for ourselves. And George Soros is one of those gamblers at the international casino. It's quite clear that Britain sees Turkey as a useful ally in the Middle East. For example, Incirlik Air Base, a great place to jump off if you want to go somewhere. It's really using Turkey as an airstrip. It's a big airstrip for British fighters, American jets, this kind of thing. But the most important thing about Turkey is it's an Islamic country. And so the British government, and particularly the Secret Service, see it as a perfect jumping off point to get involved in Islamic terrorism. And I think that there is a lot of training, for example, of the Turkish military goes on right here in Britain. Sandhurst is the military training college for the army officers. Many Turkish officers will be trained over here in Britain, and then they'll be sent back to Turkey. But will they be working for the Turkish interest, for the Islamic interest, or will they be working for the British interest? Because they may not be the same.
Evet Ergün, çok ilginç açıklamalar.
Çok.
Bu açıklamaları biz yapmıyoruz. Kim yapıyor? Bir İngiliz yapıyor.
BBC'nin içinden gelen biri.
İçinden gelen biri yapıyor. İngiliz istihbaratı İslam ülkelerinde terörü ve terör örgütlerini destekliyor, kuruyor, finanse ediyor. Diyor, şuna getiriyor. Yani birçok insan şehit olmaya giderken aslında İngiliz istihbaratı adına ölüyor demeye getiriyor. Bunu bir İngiliz'in söylemesi çok önemli. Benim dikkatimi çeken orada bir çok ilginç bir laf var. Fransa'da bir bakan çıktı, televizyonlarda söyledi diyor. Yıllar önce ta Sarkozy döneminde
2013'te diyor ki Suriye'yi biz karıştıracağız. Biz de var mısınız?
Fransızlara müracaat ediyor. İngiliz istihbaratı.
Haber veriyorlar. Yani bak biz burasını
Suriye'yi karıştıracağız. Beraber yani ortak hareket edelim.
benle beraber olursan sana bir pay düşer. Olmaz. Gelmezsen benimle beraber şansına küs diyor. Diplomatik lisanında. Biz ne dedik? Şimdi Hafız Esad 70'teki darbeden sonra zaten bu Beşar Esad İngiltere'de okudu. Göz doktoru tahsili gördü. Bütün komutanları, hadi özel bir şey söyleyeyim. Şimdi IŞİD'in içinde, belki yarın yazarım bunu, Şii bir komutan var. Çok iyi din eğitimi almış. Sakallar bele kadar. IŞİD'in komutanı. Ve tırnak içinde Sünni olduğunu söyleyen yüzlerce binlerce insanı yönetiyor.